Welcome to Shoaib Buzzer channel. Have you ever wondered what happens when a powerful businesswoman realizes that the success she built came at the cost of the very people who helped her get there? Today, we have a story that will shock you, make you question everything, and possibly even inspire you to rethink your own beliefs about success, justice, and the people who make it possible. Stay with us as we dive into the journey of Emma Williams, a woman who had it all, but discovered something that changed her forever. But the real question is, will she be able to make things right? Where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below. Welcome, everyone. Today, I have a story that will touch your heart, make you think, and hopefully inspire change. This is the story of Emma Williams, a successful businesswoman in New York whose world is about to be turned upside down. You see, Emma built her empire from the ground up with grit, determination, and the belief that hard work would always pay off. But as you'll soon learn, not everything is as it seems. Emma Williams had always prided herself on being a model of efficiency. Her company, headquartered in the bustling streets of New York, was the epitome of success. Every corner of her office screamed discipline, sleek, modern, minimalist. There was no room for sentimentality, no time for softness. She built this empire through long nights, sleepless hours, and an unshakable belief that those who worked hardest would be rewarded. For years, her formula worked. Her employees worked long hours, kept their heads down, and produced results. And as her business grew, so did her reputation. Emma was respected, even feared by some. Her philosophy was simple: work hard, and you will rise. Fail to deliver, and you're out. It was a cutthroat world, but for Emma, it was the only way. But lately, something was different. Emma had begun to notice that, despite the high salaries and demanding culture, her employees weren't as productive as they used to be. Something was off. There were fewer smiles in the office, fewer faces eager to push through the long hours. She had always prided herself on being a fair employer, but even she couldn't ignore the mounting layoffs and the drained energy in the building. Her company, once the pinnacle of success, was beginning to feel hollow. One of the employees who caught Emma's attention was John Miller. He seemed to fit her mold perfectly. He was a hard worker, never complained, and frequently worked double shifts. He was the kind of employee Emma admired: silent, diligent, dependable. But something about John didn't sit right with her. Despite his dedication, he didn't seem to thrive the way others did. He didn't rise up the ranks. He was stuck, unnoticed, working harder than ever yet never getting ahead. Emma's curiosity was piqued. One evening, after a long day of meetings, Emma sat at her desk, overlooking the streets of New York. Her mind raced with thoughts. She glanced at John as he packed up his things and quietly walked out of the building, as he did every evening. But tonight, something was different. He wasn't heading home directly. Emma, almost instinctively, grabbed her coat and decided to follow him. She didn't know why, but a feeling deep inside told her she needed to know more. She trailed him from a distance, keeping her car behind his as they left the busy streets of New York and drove into quieter neighborhoods. The city lights flickered in her rearview mirror as they drove farther away from the bright lights of the city center. Eventually, John made a turn onto a narrow street that led to an old, weathered building in Brooklyn. The area seemed worlds apart from the luxury of Manhattan, where Emma's office stood. It was a place that looked forgotten by time. Small, rundown houses, some barely standing, others covered in graffiti. Emma parked her car a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, trying to keep a low profile. She followed John up a set of creaky stairs to an apartment that looked like it hadn't been renovated in decades. From her vantage point, Emma could see through the window. Inside, two young children were waiting eagerly by the door. Their eyes lit up as John entered with a small bag of food in his hands. They were hungry, desperate for the little meal he had brought. Emma's heart sank. John, the man who had been her model employee, was not living the life she had imagined. He wasn't staying in a sleek apartment or eating at the best restaurants. Instead, he was living in poverty, struggling to make ends meet for his children. The children eagerly grabbed the food, devouring it as if it was the first meal they had in days. One of them, a young girl, looked up at John and asked quietly, "Daddy, will you be here tomorrow for breakfast?" John hesitated for a moment, his face softening as he forced a smile. "Of course, sweetheart. I'll be here." But there was something in his eyes, doubt. Emma saw it. He wasn't sure if he could keep his promise. Sitting in her car, Emma could barely breathe. Her fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly, her knuckles turned white. She had built her company on the idea that those who worked the hardest should be rewarded. But here was John, a man who worked harder than anyone, and yet he was struggling. His children were hungry, living in a dilapidated apartment, and Emma had never even noticed. She had been so focused on efficiency, on pushing her employees to their limits, that she had failed to see the human side of their lives. How did I miss this? Emma whispered to herself, her voice trembling. She had always considered herself a fair employer. She had believed that hard work would always lead to success. But now she was questioning everything. Was it possible that in her quest for productivity, she had overlooked the needs of the very people who helped her build her empire? As Emma sat in her car, the city lights flickering in the distance, she realized something profound. Everything she thought she knew about success, about business, was wrong. She had focused so much on the numbers, the bottom line, that she had forgotten the most important part. Miller, a man who had given everything for her company, was barely surviving, and it was her fault. She drove home that night, her mind racing with thoughts of change. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. She had to do something for John, for his children, and for all the other employees like him who had been overlooked and undervalued. The night was long for Emma Williams. She couldn't stop thinking about what she had seen. The image of John Miller sitting in that cramped, dimly lit apartment with his children, his tired eyes full of doubt, haunted her. How had she missed this? She had always prided herself on being a fair and just leader. But now she realized that her narrow focus on efficiency and productivity had blinded her to the true struggles of her employees. She had built her empire on the belief that hard work was always rewarded. But John, a man who had worked tirelessly for her company, had nothing to show for it but exhaustion and heartache. Emma's mind raced as she lay in bed that night. She knew she had to change, something had to give. She couldn't keep running her company the same way anymore. She had spent so many years focused on the financial side of things, the numbers, the margins, the profits, that she had lost sight of the people who made it all possible. John wasn't just a cog in the machine. He was a father, a man struggling to provide for his family, and she had ignored that. The next morning, Emma woke up with a heavy heart. She couldn't sit idle any longer. She needed to understand what was happening with her employees, what their lives were really like outside of the office. She needed to see things from their perspective. And so, she decided to do something drastic, something she had never done before. Instead of spending her day in her luxurious office in Manhattan, making decisions from behind her desk, Emma drove to Brooklyn, to the very neighborhood where John had taken her by surprise. She parked her car and, for the first time in years, walked the streets, trying to understand the reality of life for her employees. The area was nothing like the bustling, upscale streets of Manhattan. Brooklyn was gritty real. The buildings were old, some in desperate need of repair, with graffiti splashed across the walls. People moved slowly, their faces worn with the weight of the world. As Emma walked, she noticed the little things, the tired looks on people's faces, the desperate glances exchanged between neighbors. This wasn't the world she knew. She was used to luxury, to polished boardrooms and glamorous dinners, but here in Brooklyn, the reality was raw. Emma had always thought she understood what hard work looked like, but she was starting to realize that she had never truly seen it. Her phone buzzed, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from John Miller, asking if he could meet her for lunch. The message was brief, almost too polite. John didn't know it yet, but the course of their conversation was about to change everything. Emma made her way to the small cafe in Brooklyn, the kind of place that blended into the corner of the street, overlooked by most. It wasn't fancy, but it had a certain charm. She arrived early, nervously tapping her fingers on the table, unsure of how to approach John. He arrived shortly after, walking in with his usual steady gait, looking every bit the dedicated employee. But this time, Emma saw him differently. "John, thank you for meeting me," Emma said, offering a small smile. She was nervous, but she couldn't show it, not after everything she had learned. "Of course, Miss Williams," he replied, sitting across from her. His smile was polite, but there was something in his eyes that said he wasn't sure what to expect. Neither of them knew what to say next. They had never really talked like this before, outside of the office. After a long pause, Emma decided to speak her truth. "John, I've been doing some thinking about you, about your situation." She hesitated, but then continued. "I didn't know. I didn't realize what you've been going through." John's face hardened for a moment, but then he softened. "You don't need to worry about me, Miss Williams," he said quietly. I'm just doing what I need to do for my family. I know I'm not the only one struggling. Emma shook her head, her heart heavy. No, John, you're right. You're not the only one. And that's exactly why I'm here. I've been so focused on the success of the company, I've missed what's really important. I've missed the people. And I want to change that. John looked at her in disbelief. You want to change what? He asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. I want to make sure that you, and everyone like you, are treated fairly. I want to make sure that the people who work hardest for this company, who give everything to it, don't have to struggle. You shouldn't have to choose between your family and your job. For the first time, John looked vulnerable. His eyes softened, and his voice cracked as he spoke. I don't know how much longer I can keep doing this, Miss Williams. I'm barely hanging on. I just want to do right by my kids. They deserve better than this. Emma felt a lump form in her throat. The realization hit her hard. The truth was staring her in the face. She had been so caught up in her own world of business success that she had forgotten the people who made it all possible. John wasn't just an employee. He was a man trying to make a living, trying to provide for his family, just like anyone else. I'm going to fix this, John, she said, her voice firm with resolve. I'll make sure no one has to live like this. Not on my watch. John didn't say anything for a long moment. And for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she was truly listening. This wasn't about business anymore. This was about people. About dignity. About justice. She had to do the right thing. But what would that mean for the future of her company? And would her employees believe her? As Emma sat there, reflecting on the conversation, she realized just how much work there was to do. She wasn't sure what changes would come or how they would affect her business, but she knew one thing. She couldn't go back to the way things were. And then came the big question. Could she truly make a difference? Could she change the culture of her company and give people like John a chance at a better life? What do you think, my friends? Do you believe Emma Williams can turn things around, or will she fail? Keep watching, because the next chapter will reveal what happens next, and trust me, it's going to surprise you. Stay tuned. The next few days passed in a blur for Emma Williams. She couldn't stop thinking about her conversation with John Miller. His words echoed in her mind. I just want to do right by my kids. Emma realized just how much she had taken for granted. She had built an empire, but at what cost? What good was success if the people who helped you get there were left behind? That evening, as Emma sat in her office in Manhattan, she made a decision. She couldn't just talk about change, she needed to act on it. The corporate world she had built was driven by hard numbers, tight margins, and ruthless ambition. But what if there was a way to build a successful company that also cared for the people who made it all possible? What if real success was measured by the well-being of her employees, not just profits? The next morning, Emma arrived at her office early, the city still asleep. As she stood in front of her window, gazing out at the skyline of New York, it was the same view she had seen every day. But today, it felt different. Today, she was going to make a change. She wasn't going to continue down the same path she had walked for years, blinded by her own ambition. She had a responsibility to her employees, to John Miller, and to every person who had ever worked hard for her company. Her assistant, Rachel, knocked on the door and entered. Miss Williams, the board meeting is scheduled for 11 a.m. today. Are you ready? Emma nodded, her mind already racing with the steps she needed to take. Yes, but I need you to do something for me first, Rachel, she said, her voice calm but determined. I want you to gather information on our employees. I want to know how many are working double shifts, how many have children, and how many are struggling financially. I need to know the truth about the people who work for us. Rachel raised an eyebrow in surprise. Are you sure about this, Miss Williams? I'm sure, Emma replied firmly. We've been operating under the assumption that our employees are just numbers. But they're not. They're human beings, and we've ignored their needs for far too long. It's time to change that. As Rachel went to work gathering the information, Emma spent the morning reflecting on her conversation with John. She thought about the way he had smiled at her when they first met, how he had always been so polite and respectful. Yet, despite his dedication, he had never been given the opportunities he deserved. Emma knew that she had failed him, and she wasn't about to let that happen again. At 11 a.m., Emma sat down with the board of directors in the sleek conference room of her Manhattan office. The room was filled with serious faces, each one eager to discuss the next steps for the company. David Thompson, one of the senior investors, looked at her expectantly. Emma, we've been reviewing the quarterly reports, and the numbers are strong. What's on your mind today? Emma took a deep breath, her mind focused on what she was about to say. For the first time in years, she was ready to speak her truth. We've been so focused on financial success that we've forgotten the most important part of our company, our employees. I've learned that many of them are struggling, working long hours, and making sacrifices to support their families. I want us to change our approach. The room fell silent. David Thompson raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. What do you mean by change our approach? This company has thrived because we've stayed focused on efficiency and productivity. I'm aware of that, Emma replied, her voice steady. But we can't keep pushing people to their limits without considering their well-being. We need to implement fair wages, childcare benefits, and a support system for those who are struggling. We need to invest in our people, not just our profits. The board members exchanged uncertain glances. But Emma pressed on. I've already spoken with some of our employees, including John Miller, and I've seen the reality of their lives. They deserve better. We're going to make sure they get it. After a long pause, David Thompson finally spoke. You're talking about a shift in our entire business model. It's a huge risk, Emma. But I suppose you're right. We can't keep ignoring the human side of this company. The meeting went on for another hour as Emma laid out her vision for the company's future. She proposed raising wages for all employees, offering childcare and healthcare benefits, and creating an emergency fund to help those facing financial difficulties. It was a bold plan, one that would cost the company in the short term. But Emma was willing to make the sacrifice. By the end of the meeting, the board had agreed to her proposal, though not without hesitation. Emma knew it wasn't going to be easy. There would be challenges ahead, and there would be resistance. But for the first time in years, she felt like she was doing the right thing. The next day, Emma called a company-wide meeting at the New York headquarters. Employees gathered in the large auditorium, murmuring in curiosity. Emma stood at the front of the room, her heart pounding with nervous excitement. She had never addressed the entire company like this before. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice steady but full of emotion. I'm sure you're all wondering why we've called this meeting. And I'm sure some of you are nervous about what I'm about to say. But I need you to know that this is the most important message I've ever delivered. She paused, gathering her thoughts before continuing. I've realized that I failed you. For years, I've focused on the success of the company, but I've ignored your struggles. I've overlooked your hard work, your dedication, and your sacrifices, and for that, I am truly sorry. The room was silent, and for a moment, Emma wasn't sure if they believed her. But then she saw the faces of the employees, some uncertain, others hopeful. She pressed on. We're going to change things. We're going to make sure that everyone here has the support they need to thrive. We're raising wages, providing childcare benefits, and creating a fund to help those in need. I know this won't be easy, but I promise you, we're in this together. We are a team, and it's time we start acting like one. The employees sat in stunned silence for a moment, and then, slowly, applause began to fill the room. At first, it was hesitant, but as the realization set in, the applause grew louder. Emma felt a weight lift from her shoulders, knowing that this was the right decision. As the meeting ended, John Miller approached her, his eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, Miss Williams, he said, his voice trembling. You've given me hope. Emma smiled, feeling a sense of pride she had never experienced before. Thank you, John. You showed me what really matters, and now it's my turn to show you that I'm listening. And so, Emma Williams had found her purpose. Not just as a businesswoman, but as a leader who understood the true meaning of success. She had learned that success wasn't just about the bottom line. It was about the people you served, the lives you touched, and the change you brought into the world. But the question remains, will Emma Williams be able to sustain this change, or will the pressures of the business world pull her back into old habits? What do you think? Let us know in the comments, and stay tuned for what comes next in this incredible journey. Thank you for watching. We truly appreciate you taking the time to watch this story. Your support means the world to us, and we hope it inspired you to think about the real meaning of success and fairness. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe so you never miss a new story from us here at Story 79. Stay tuned for more heartwarming and thought-provoking content. Thank you again, and we'll see you in the next one.